I'm sorry, is that your ambassador? The reptilian delegate's voice echoed through the tribunal chamber, dripping in sarcasm as he motioned toward the lone human woman standing at the center podium. A low chuckle rippled across the room, joined by clicks, growls, and metallic laughter from dozens of alien species seated in the crescent-shaped tiers above. Some leaned back with amusement, others whispered among themselves as if the entire scene were a comedy performance. She stood completely still, hands folded, not reacting. No entourage. No elaborate attire. No visible weapon. Just a faded gray coat and worn boots that still carried the red dust of Earth's failing fields. One avian representative raised a feathered brow and muttered something about ceremonial standards. Another adjusted his breathing filter and remarked, "Did Earth forget this wasn't a village council?" The Tribunal, the most powerful legislative body in the known galaxy, had gathered to discuss Earth's plea to lift the economic and technological embargo that had crippled the planet for nearly 3 years. But all eyes now mocked the representative who came to deliver that plea. They hadn't even asked her name yet. She glanced at the massive ticking holoclock above the tribunal doors. It ticked down from 5 minutes, the total time granted to Earth's delegation to speak. She had not touched the microphone. Not raised her voice. Not even cleared her throat. Just waited. In the hush between alien chuckles, she finally took a step forward, her boots softly clicking on the crystalline platform. The room dimmed slightly as the speaking light focused on her. She looked up at the sea of delegates. Her voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and strangely unimpressed. "You mock Earth because it's easier than admitting what you've done to it. Easier than facing your own laws. Easier than remembering who cleaned up your war zones when your own people wouldn't." The laughter stopped. A few of the younger delegates blinked, confused by the tone. She didn't sound angry. Or desperate. She sounded like someone with nothing left to prove. "My name is Ada M. I am Earth's representative. And I did not come here to ask for mercy. I came to remind you." There was a flicker in the tribunal's ambient lighting. Some thought it was a glitch until they noticed the slight tremor in the floor, a subtle shift, like something unseen had just docked or arrived. A cold edge crept into the room. She reached slowly beneath the lapel of her coat and pulled out a flat, scratched metallic item no bigger than a child's palm. The camera drones zoomed in instantly. It was not decorative. Not polished. Not political. It was a military commendation, the kind usually buried with the soldier. She stepped forward, unceremoniously placed the medal on the tribunal bench, and stepped back. The silence was absolute. The delegate from the Voth Confederacy, a species known for their steel-trunked memories, stood up in alarm. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the scratches and engraving. One of his aides whispered, and the delegate paled. That medal hadn't been seen in open chambers for nearly 2 centuries. It was the Cross of Orion Valor, a citation awarded only once in recent galactic memory. And the only confirmed recipient was supposed to be dead. Or erased. Or both. Another delegate from the Skarn Hive clicked violently and turned to the lead arbiter. How did she get that? Who authorized this breach of classified military history? But the arbiter, a smooth-voiced cybernetic known as Voxari, remained still, eye sensors fixated on the woman. He had served during the Silent Nebula conflict. He remembered that medal. He remembered what had happened on the Vrax outpost. And the one who wore it. Not carried it. Not inherited it. Wore it. Ada looked up at him as if reading his thoughts. "You left Earth out of your war councils. You stole its field tech. You buried its missions beneath non-disclosure treaties. And then, when the damage done came due, you embargoed the victims." Zarthun, the tusked warlord of the Triangular Dominion, slammed his fists down and stood. He barked that this was not the forum for ancient war stories. He accused her of bringing forged artifacts and emotional manipulation. He shouted something about human irrelevance, about how Earth couldn't even keep its own satellites in orbit without begging for aid. Ada stared at him without blinking. And then she said the first sentence that silenced even Zarthun. You paid for the Vrax offensive through 6 shell companies registered on a rogue moon you claimed was a nature preserve. Want me to list them alphabetically? The chamber nearly erupted. Voxari raised a hand for silence, but the chaos was already spreading. Ada didn't flinch. She stepped to the side as if offering the floor. From the crowd, 3 more humans stood, silent, older, faces worn with scars. Each of them held a badge identical to the one she had placed on the tribunal bench. No one moved. One of the delegates let out an audible hiss and muttered, "They're not supposed to be alive." Another whispered that squad was erased from the records. Ghost operatives. Ada took a breath, then said what she had come to say. Earth isn't asking for charity. We're not asking for apologies. We're demanding that the tribunal obey the very rules you created. Either the embargo is lifted, or every sealed file I hold goes public. I have no interest in legacy. Only truth. And it doesn't matter how many of you laugh at Earth. We remember everything. Even the things you tried to make us forget. No one laughed now. The timer above the chamber hit 0. Her 5 minutes were up. But no one signaled for her to stop. Not even Voxari. In that moment, with the ancient medal on the bench and the ghosts of her squad behind her, Ada M. wasn't a diplomat. She was a storm in human skin. A memory they couldn't erase. And Earth, once ignored and mocked, had just reminded the galaxy that its silence was never submission. It was calculation. And its voice, when finally spoken, was louder than 1,000 fleets. The silence in the chamber hung heavy, almost unnatural, as if the very walls were trying to hold their breath. Delegates who had once laughed now leaned forward, their expressions a mix of disbelief and unease. Voxari, still seated on the elevated center platform, tapped a single metallic finger on the bench, not to call order, but to confirm to himself that the world around him was still real. Ada stood motionless, her eyes scanning the crowd, not to intimidate, but to make sure they were truly seeing her. Not as a messenger from a so-called backwater planet, but as someone who had once walked into fire for planets that now pretended they didn't know her name. Across the chamber, the Voth delegate was already sending encrypted messages to his home council. The recognition of that medal alone had triggered dormant protocols buried deep in galactic intelligence archives. More fire. That was the code name. Only ever spoken in classified rooms and half-finished war memoirs. Ada M. wasn't a diplomat. She was the ghost who'd led Operation Blackstream into the Vraxian stronghold, a suicide mission that somehow ended with the obliteration of an entire fleet and the capture of their Neural Command relay. She and her squad hadn't been decorated. They'd been buried under non-disclosure acts, erased from history by the very leaders they'd saved. Voxari knew. He had signed off on it. Zarthon still stood, but his bluster had cooled into something much more cautious. The mention of shell companies wasn't a bluff. It was a loaded railgun aimed at his entire political legacy. He glanced around, searching for allies, but none of the other delegates returned his gaze. They were watching her. Watching Ada, who now stepped back and allowed her 3 companions to approach. They said nothing. But the medals they carried were enough. The Tribunal's inner sensors verified them instantly. Unforgeable quantum etchings. Their names were sealed, but their deeds, once dismissed as myth, were aligning with data fragments long thought corrupted. Ada's voice returned calm and level, like someone explaining weather patterns, not war crimes. You embargoed Earth not because it failed, but because it refused to sign away its autonomy. You branded us unstable while profiting from our tech, our labor, our soldiers. You told the galaxy we were too dangerous to trust, while quietly bidding on our black market energy cores. I have transcripts. I have logs. And more importantly, I have memory. The chamber began to stir again. Delegates whispered in multiple languages. A few leaned toward their aides, issuing instructions that made translators work double time. Voxari finally stood. His voice carried across the dome with a measured calm, but there was tension behind every syllable. Miss Ada M., by revealing classified operations and personal military commendations, you place yourself in violation of Interspecies Protocol 14. You risk not only expulsion but retaliation from certain states. Are you prepared for that? She didn't flinch. You already erased us once. What more can you take? The words settled like dust, fine and impossible to remove. Her answer wasn't defiance. It was fatigue. The kind only felt by people who've been betrayed by systems they bled for. One of her squad members, a gray-haired man with a twisted scar across his cheek, took out a small cube and placed it on the bench beside the metal. It began to hum quietly, then projected a three-dimensional file web into the air. Hundreds of connections lit up between names, bank transfers, votes cast in subcommittees, and tech acquisition logs. Each line pointed back to Earth. Each one contradicted official tribunal records. Zarthun barked for the projection to be dismissed. He called it fabricated. Said it was a terrorist stunt. But before his outburst could gather traction, the Skarn delegate, a species notoriously hard to impress, rose and asked a question no one expected. What was your objective at Vrak's outpost? Ada looked directly at her. To stop a war you were too proud to acknowledge was yours. The answer hit harder than any accusation. The Skarn representative slowly nodded, then sat down again, saying nothing further. For her, that was endorsement. For the room, it was momentum shifting. Voxari approached the projection and inserted a neutral court key, verifying the logs without bias. Each connection held. The cube didn't just contain data. It contained damning confirmation. The embargo on Earth had been the result of falsified reports engineered by members of the Tribunal to cover up their own unauthorized tech trials using Earth prototypes. Those trials had failed catastrophically. Instead of accepting responsibility, they had pointed the finger back at Earth and locked it out of the galactic economy. One delegate from the Nilari cluster, long silent, suddenly stood and asked why Earth hadn't exposed this earlier. Ada didn't hesitate. Because you wouldn't have listened. Because last time we spoke, you sent sanctions, not sympathy. Because when you needed fighters, we were welcome. But when we asked for fairness, we were ignored. Another stood. And why now? She let that question hang in the air. Then said softly, because this time, you're not the only ones watching. The broadcast drones blinked red, indicating external transmission. The tribunal was no longer a closed room. The outer systems were watching. The colonies. The fringe alliances. The neutral planets. All of them tuned in, witnessing the unraveling of the story they'd been told about Earth. And the woman who had come not with anger, but with evidence. Voxari looked back at her, more intrigued than threatened now. If what you say is true, and the embargo was established under false pretense, what do you seek? She paused. Earth wants no seats. No control. No revenge. Just release the embargo. Let our people trade. Let our tech flow. Let us live. And if that's too much to ask, then ask yourselves why you fear a planet you claimed had no power. Zarthun tried once more to rally resistance. He accused her of timing the data release for political leverage. He declared her dangerous. Unpredictable. But his voice had lost its rhythm. The room no longer revolved around him. It revolved around her. Around the quiet strength of a soldier who had once walked into the darkest corridors of galactic war and returned without asking for applause. Me. The chamber didn't sleep. Even after Ada walked out, the tribunal did not return to its normal cadence. Delegates lingered. Conversations sparked and fizzled like unstable plasma. Voxari remained at his station, unmoving, staring at the pulsing data cube left behind by the humans. The cube had already verified dozens of connections, names, aliases, unregistered transactions, rogue tech deployments, all of them leading back to members within the very council tasked with safeguarding peace across the galaxy. What Ada had brought wasn't merely scandal. It was structural rot. And for the first time in cycles, the tribunal itself was the one under quiet investigation. Outside, on the wide platforms suspended over the zero-gravity plaza, the press drones swarmed like insects. The entire galaxy was watching. This time, they weren't watching Earth. They were watching the reaction of the tribunal. How long it would stall, deflect, bury, or retaliate. They had seen a woman bring truth without firing a weapon, and they wanted to know who would move first to deny it. Inside one of the sealed conference chambers, a smaller emergency committee had formed, officially for the purpose of damage assessment, though everyone knew it was just a scramble to figure out who was about to be exposed next. Zarthun sat at the head, his fists clenched tighter than his jaw. 3 screens behind him showed feeds of different council sectors reacting to the leaks. Some delegates had already fled. Others were posting sudden public endorsements of Earth. A few were quiet, too quiet. Those were the ones planning something. A younger aide approached Zarthun with a quiet whisper, handing him a sealed folder. He opened it and scanned quickly. His skin paled several shades. The report confirmed it. At least 4 of his shell companies had been directly tied to the illegal usage of Earth's AI drill tech in the Galvan 3 mining incident. The same incident that killed thousands and became the Tribunal's justification for cutting Earth off. And now the logs, unauthorized, time-stamped, digitally unbroken, showed his proxy authorization. It was unspinnable. Unless he acted faster than the vote. Meanwhile, on the lower tier of the Tribunal's public floor, Ada and her team had not returned to Earth. They had remained, mostly unnoticed, in the quieter outer wings of the administrative complex. Not hiding, watching. She sat with her squad in a darkened lounge overlooking the stars. No one spoke. These weren't politicians, after all. They were ghosts by design, operatives conditioned for silence and survival. But even among them, the atmosphere was tight. Ada finally broke it with a quiet sentence. "He'll try to kill me before the vote." One of her team, a tall woman with a prosthetic eye, nodded slowly. "Probably. But not through official channels. He'll outsource it, make it look like fringe retaliation. Maybe stage a blast. Or a drone. Or a framing." The third member, an older man with pale skin and a data port running along his spine, glanced at the drone cam in the corner. It was blinking red. Live. Everything was blinking red now. Ada didn't seem fazed. "If he tries anything too loud, it confirms our leverage. If he tries anything too quiet, we survive and it backfires." The man asked the question they'd all been holding. "Do we release the second file?" Ada didn't answer immediately. The second file was different. It contained not just logs, but raw footage. Footage of Tribunal vessels recovering stolen Earth tech. Footage of prototype use on frontier colonies where human engineers had been disappeared. It would ignite more than just shame. It would incite rebellion across fringe systems that had long suspected the Tribunal of double standards. Earth's embargo would just be the start. She looked out at the stars and said calmly, "Not yet. Give them a chance to vote clean." Back in the main chamber, Voxari had quietly called in 3 data specialists from neutral planets. They worked independently, using layered AI protocols to verify the authenticity of the logs. Within 2 hours, they had validated nearly 80% of the cube's contents. No breaks. No tampering. No fakes. And every piece pointed to systemic abuse of Earth's innovation, followed by systemic silencing. The Tribunal was now under investigation by its own bylaws. But the countdown to the embargo vote loomed larger than the scandal itself. As word spread of the pending decision, small factions within the Tribunal began to shift alliances. The Skarnhive offered a conditional statement of support for Earth's reinstatement. The Nalari proposed trade probation instead of full sanctions. A surprising number of frontier delegates backed full lifting of the embargo and proposed restitution. The tide was turning. But Zarthun wasn't finished. He made a private call to an off-grid unit operating under diplomatic immunity. A team of hired silencers. They were instructed not to kill Ada, at least not at first. Their mission was to erase the data cube from within Tribunal systems and capture her long enough to extract her access codes. It was supposed to be surgical. It wasn't. They struck during a scheduled maintenance blackout inside the administrative wing. 4 operatives disguised as Tribunal tech support entered the corridor outside the lounge where Ada and her team were gathered. They expected civilians. What they got were trained counter-ops who'd already predicted the strike window. The first intruder barely stepped through the door before Ada twisted his weapon arm and dropped him with a joint snap. The second tried a flash suppressor but was tackled from behind by the prosthetic-eyed woman, who drove her knee into his solar core hard enough to short his neural links. The other two fled. But not far. They were intercepted by Tribunal security bots, rerouted by the data port man from Ada's team, who had already scrambled every access node on the wing. Voxari, notified seconds later, reviewed the security footage. His first thought wasn't about the attack, it was about how fast the humans neutralized it. No wasted movement. No fear. Just action. He stared at Ada's face on the footage. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a reminder of everything the Tribunal had chosen to forget about Earth. And everything they had underestimated. The news of the failed assault leaked within the hour. It was impossible to contain. Tribunal systems were compromised. Delegates were now debating not only the embargo, but the safety of the entire governing body. And somehow, amidst that chaos, Ada remained seated, watching the stars, as if she knew that the real war wasn't over weapons or secrets. It was over truth. And truth, when revealed with precision, didn't need to shout. It just needed to survive. Long enough to be undeniable. The vote was less than a rotation away. And the Tribunal was learning the hard way what Earth had always known. You don't push a cornered planet. Especially not one led by someone who'd already died once for peace. The attack attempt changed everything. It didn't just backfire on Zarthun's faction, it detonated beneath their feet. By sunrise cycle, every neutral delegate knew what had happened in the corridor outside the administrative wing. Footage of the failed extraction was leaked anonymously to interplanetary news nodes. In it, you could see one of the masked intruders whispering into a comm device seconds before being dropped by a combat maneuver that looked almost rehearsed. You could hear the click of a dislocated elbow. You could see Ada, calm, calculating, moving as if her body remembered things her words never spoke. Within minutes of the leak, Tribunal feeds flooded with commentary. Earth was no longer viewed as weak or desperate. It was a target. And someone had tried to silence the woman holding the only clean ledger in the room. Delegates who once chuckled at her now refused to meet her eyes. The Tribunal had turned into something it had never been before, a frightened room. Voxari reviewed the footage again from his personal archive. The AI overlays confirmed there had been no excessive force from Ada or her team. No deaths. Every movement was clean, efficient, measured. They had simply responded faster than any known species would have expected. That wasn't diplomacy. That was instinct. That was a reminder that Earth didn't produce diplomats by accident. It produced survivors. And when survivors spoke, they didn't use microphones. They used silence and truth like weapons. He activated a secure line to the Tribunal Ethics Board, something rarely used. The voice on the other end didn't need background. They had already seen the footage. The response was simple. If she speaks during the vote session, let her finish. Whatever she says, we'll verify later. But it must be heard. Meanwhile, in a backroom barely the size of a storage pod, Zarthun was unraveling. The problem wasn't just that the attack had failed. The problem was that the failure had accelerated everything. Delegates who once followed his lead were now backing away, issuing cautious statements and preemptive denials. The shell companies tied to the mining deaths were already under investigation. And now, the failed attempt on Ada's life had turned her into a symbol. Not just a representative of Earth, but a symbol of what the Tribunal had tried to bury. The harder they tried to silence her, the louder her presence became. He knew he was losing. And worse, he didn't know how to stop it. In the main chamber, the vote was scheduled to begin in 1 hour. Delegates had taken their places. The broadcast drones floated silently, capturing every twitch of movement and flicker of expression. The seat reserved for Earth remained empty. Voxari stood at the center. When the noise fell into silence, he made a quiet announcement. Before the vote, Earth's representative has been granted 6 minutes of final address. The chamber was still. No one objected. The door opened. Ada walked in alone. No squad. No security. No fanfare. Just her coat, her boots, and that same calm expression that had become more unsettling than any war speech. She stepped onto the platform and looked at each delegate, one by one. She didn't begin with thanks. She didn't bow. She spoke. You have all seen what we've brought. The data, the proof, the trail of how Earth's innovations were stripped, misused, and turned against us. I'm not here to repeat those details. You already know them. I'm here to say one last thing. And it's not about the embargo. It's about the pattern. You fear Earth not because we're unstable. You fear us because we remember. We remember the wars we helped you win. We remember the relief ships we sent to your burned colonies. We remember how you welcomed us into your conflicts but locked us out of your peace. She reached into her coat and withdrew a small device. She activated it with a thumb press. A hologram burst into the air, playing raw audio from a closed tribunal discussion 7 years ago. It was clipped, grainy, but unmistakable. In it, a voice could be heard saying, "Earth is valuable until it learns to negotiate. Then it becomes a liability." The hologram faded. No explanation was needed. You buried our names. You wrote history around our silence. And now that silence has ended. Earth is not begging. We're not even demanding. We're warning you. The next time you call us primitive, remember who cleans up the blood after you lose control of your own wars. She stepped back. The chamber did not erupt. It didn't need to. The silence was thicker than before. The kind of silence that came before tectonic change. Voxari looked out across the delegates. Then he spoke. Motion to lift embargo on Earth. All in favor, submit signal. The floor lit up. One by one, glowing lights blinked green. Not all. But enough. More than enough. Even factions that had remained silent now voted in favor, not because they trusted Earth, but because they feared what hiding the truth any longer would cost them. Voxari's voice returned, steady and final. The embargo is lifted. Effective immediately. Sanctions repealed. Earth is reinstated to trade status. Investigation into corruption charges will begin at once. Ada did not smile. She gave a small nod and turned to leave. But before she reached the exit, a question came from one of the quieter delegates, a serpentine figure from the Cyroan sector, known for their precision and neutrality. Why didn't you release the second file? She paused. Then answered over her shoulder. Because I still believe in diplomacy. Even when you don't. Then she walked out. The tribunal did not cheer. There was no applause. Only the low hum of shifting power. But across the stars, on frontier worlds and in silenced colonies, the message traveled fast. Earth had not knelt. Earth had stood in front of the galaxy, not as a threat, but as a reckoning. And for the first time in decades, the tribunal was afraid of silence. Because now they understood what it meant when Earth chose to speak. The return to Earth was quiet. No broadcasts, no banners, no celebrations. Ada stepped off the transport alone, her coat still marked by the edges of battle no one had seen but everyone had felt. The shuttle bay beneath the crumbling station barely looked functional. A few engineers paused their work when she passed, recognizing her but unsure whether to speak. They didn't need to. She gave a nod, one that carried the weight of victory not declared through ceremony, but through survival. The tribunal had lifted the embargo, but Earth hadn't won a prize. It had clawed its way back into existence, dragging its truth across a galaxy that tried to bury it. The sky was red-orange as she walked toward the edge of the valley where she had grown up. The trees looked older. Or maybe she did. There was a single figure waiting for her beside a weathered fence post. A child, maybe 12, with soil on her sleeves and half a wrench sticking out of one back pocket. She tilted her head as Ada approached. "Is it true?" the girl asked, eyes wide. "Did you tell them off and walk out?" Ada smiled faintly. "I told the truth. Then I walked out." The girl nodded, as if that answer satisfied something larger than curiosity. My dad says we're gonna be able to sell parts again. That he might get his job back. Ada crouched down. That's what this was for. Not medals. Not speeches. Just that. The girl hesitated, then asked, "Were you scared?" Ada thought about it. About the moment the drones circled. About the silence after she laid the medal on the bench. About the half-second where she knew someone had tried to kill her. About the seconds after. I was never afraid of them. I was afraid they'd never listen. The girl looked away and kicked at the dirt. Maybe next time, we'll be the ones making the rules. Maybe, Ada replied. But if you do, remember the ones who sat quiet while others suffered. Power's a tool, not a goal. The girl nodded again, more slowly this time, and walked off toward the machine yard. Later that evening, Ada stood inside a small storage room in the back of a worn-out cabin. The shelves were lined with old data pads, broken transmitters, and bits of history no one had bothered to clean up. In the corner sat a drawer that hadn't been touched in years. She opened it. The light inside was dim, flickering. She reached in and pulled out the medal. The cross of Orion Valor, still scratched, still silent. She looked at it without expression, then set it back in the drawer and closed it slowly. She didn't need to carry it anymore. The story had been told. Outside, a breeze stirred the dry grass. The ground didn't tremble with ships or armies. It moved gently, like something remembering what it felt like to grow. Across the fields, figures moved, farmers, builders, repair crews, all returning to work that had been suspended during the embargo. The machines would need parts. The towns would need rebuilding. The planet would need care. But Earth wasn't broken. It was patient. Far from the valley, on a neutral space station orbiting a minor moon, a delegate from the frontier colonies drafted a proposal. It wasn't aimed at the Tribunal directly. It was addressed to Earth. It requested Earth's guidance in building a new security protocol, one focused on transparency, defensive cooperation, and small world protection. Not military leadership. Guidance. The delegate signed the message with quiet hope, not expecting a reply soon, but sending it anyway. On a separate channel, an old officer from the Skarn Hive composed a brief note and sent it across the secure diplomatic net. The message was only one sentence. If you ever choose to lead, we will follow. No name. No title. Ada never saw it. She never needed to. In the days that followed, whispers began. That Earth's team had gone underground again. That the second file still existed. That some tribunal members were stepping down voluntarily before investigations caught them in lies. The galaxy was shifting, not in war or fire, but in caution. Ada hadn't come to conquer. She'd come to remind them what silence really meant. And now the stars were adjusting. Back on Earth, she took no position in the new government restructuring. She declined appointments, rejected interviews, and ignored every call from documentary producers and historical commissions. She spent most of her days walking the land, clearing old rust from fences, planting in ground that had once cracked under dust. Every now and then someone would stop her, recognize her, ask for a story. She never gave one. All she ever said was, "It's fixed now. You make sure it stays that way." One morning, she found herself standing near a ridge she hadn't visited in years. The valley below stretched out wide, dotted with scattered signs of recovery. A new transport line cut through the hills. A water plant shimmered under repair drones. Kids ran near a half-repaired power array. She watched without speaking. Behind her, a vehicle pulled up, quiet and unannounced. A familiar voice spoke. "They're asking if you'll come speak at the next Frontier Summit." Ada turned slightly. The man was part of her old squad, now dressed like every other civilian, hair longer, eyes softer. She raised an eyebrow. "What would I say?" "Whatever you didn't say last time." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Tell them the only reason I stood in front of the tribunal was because someone had to. If they want me to speak again, then it means they still don't know how." He nodded, didn't push. They stood together in the fading light, the wind brushing past like an old companion. Either of them spoke again. Words weren't necessary. Somewhere above, in a different layer of the sky, a new satellite blinked online. Its signal pinged across 3 different sectors, carrying trade requests from Earth. Not demands. Not conditions. Invitations. Some were accepted. Some ignored. But every single one marked the return of a planet that refused to be erased. And at the very center of it, without a title, without a uniform, without a flag, stood a woman who had said the one thing no one else dared. She hadn't asked for respect. She'd made them remember why she had earned it. She never spoke of the files again. Never wore the medal again. Never corrected the myths they whispered about her name. She didn't have to. Earth had spoken once. And the stars would never forget the silence that came after.